Good morning to all. I'd like to welcome you to the Town of Hilton Head Island's regularly scheduled January 27th Public Planning Committee meeting. Krista, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir, I certainly will. Mr. Stanford.
Present.
Mrs. Becker.
Here.
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Ames.
Here.
And Mr. Harkins just joined the meeting, sir.
Yes, welcome, Bill.
Good morning. Morning, everyone. Thank you, David.
I'd like to amend the agenda to have an executive session to review legal matters related to Islanders Beach. Is there a motion to do so?
So moved.
Is there a-
Second.
All those in favor, just simply raise your hand, please. Thank you. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Approval of the December 16 minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve as written.
Is there a
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Thank you very much. And Krista, do we have comments by citizens today?
Yes, sir, we do. We have 4 citizens signed up and 3 currently joined. Our first citizen to speak is Miss Patsy Bryson. Let me admit her into the room. Ms. Bryson, you may begin your comments, please.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Thank you very much. Patsy Bryson, as you know, a resident of the South Forest Beach area. I'm also co-founder of the Coalition of Island Neighbors, known as COIN. Today I'm speaking about the e-bike regulation, which appears on your agenda. It is later in the agenda, so I hope you can remember my comments by the time you get there. But I wanted to say once again, I am totally opposed to allowing e-bikes on the town's pathways and on the beach area. And today I'm authorized on behalf of COIN to also urge the Public Planning Committee to recommend that Town Council continue the language, enforcement of language in the town code, which prohibits electric bicycles from being on the town's pathways. My insistence on this is based upon analysis of the South Carolina law, being a retired attorney, not licensed in South Carolina. But I join with another attorney on the Bike Walk Board who also disagrees with the town's interpretation of the South Carolina law. We do believe that the town has the authority to regulate e-bikes on its pathways. Indeed, the recommendation provided by staff provides for that. So I continue to urge that the town look at the pathways. I am encouraged by the recommendations which require education about use of bikes on the pathways. Bike Walk has been urging that and is looking forward to working with the town staff on those educational materials. As a resident of the South Forest Beach area, I have sent to this committee measurements that I've taken of the pathways in the South Forest Beach area, which are too narrow for e-bikes. Indeed, it's very crowded in the summer and now pretty much year round with the number of bicyclists and pedestrians on the pathways in the South Forest Beach and the North Forest Beach area for e-bikes to be used in those areas. I'm heartened by the advancement of Pope Avenue Streetscape project in the fiscal year 2022-2023 for improvements to the pathways to help address some of the crowded situations, especially if the town is going to allow e-bikes on those pathways. But please remember also the side streets. I'm working with the town staff on the Bike Walk CIP task force, and they are going to be looking at those side streets because those are the places where I took the measurements and where the pathways are too narrow for e-bikes. We have so many children and adults who have not been on their bikes in years, riding on our pathways and enjoying them. And we're very, very happy to have that. It's wonderful to see folks out on their bikes enjoying them. But what we need to be mindful of is the danger of e-bikes and the challenge that we have in those pathways. So I'd urge you to look at those side streets as well. And lastly, I hope that you will actually go out to these areas and look at these pathways before you take action. because only on the ground can you see what is happening. And I thank you for the opportunity of speaking.
Thank you, Ms. Bryson. Hang on, I'm sorry, that was my fault.
That's all right.
Sorry, that was my fault. That's all right. Okay, sir, sorry about that. Our next caller on the line is Frank Babel. He's next on the line. Okay, sir, sorry about that. Next caller on the line is Mr. Babel, if you could please mute your background noise. You're next to call on the line, please. Okay, sir, we're not hearing from Mr. Babel, so I'm.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Babel. Mr. Babel.
Frank Babel, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you
Please
hear me?
proceed.
Okay,
Please
sorry about
proceed.
that. And first of all, I want to thank the committee and the workshops and all the folks that have weighed in on this issue. I know this has been a while, and I just appreciate everything that you folks have done. Just a thought before we go into the actual program that's being recommended by Josh, and you'll hear from other speakers. Since the first pathway was built, we got to step back and look at kind of the fundamentals of this thing. Since the first pathway was built by Sea Pines in the summer of 1970, it has been the strategy of most POAs in the town to build and maintain a network of multi-use pathways that connect our whole island. By most accounts, it's been a great success and one of Hilton's most important and frequently used amenities. But let's look at the visitors who come here and use these trails by the tens of thousands in season. They come from places with no multi-use trails. They ride on the road, are recreational cyclists, and where they come from, bikes aren't allowed on sidewalks, and walkers are on the other side of the road walking against traffic. And in many states, cars stop for people waiting to cross crosswalks. So when they get here, most people don't know where to go on the pathway or what to do. They haven't had to contend with passing a walker because walkers, where they come from, are on the other side of the road. So they don't say passing on your left. And in cities where there are huge investments to build alternative transportation, bike lanes are the way to go and what they're used to. And here we don't really give them much help. So much of the angst that's directed at e-bikes is really directed at the people who have no sense of pathway etiquette or courtesy. And because we don't have an overabundance of enforcement, certainly on our pathways, it is an area that has been overlooked, but it really needs to be addressed. And I believe and would submit that it's the root of one of our problems here. So we need the town to agree that we need a bike ped courtesy etiquette program. Now, we in Bike Walk have some skill sets and interests to work with the town, the sheriff's department, the POAs, and the chamber to get something done. And town staff has certainly lined up a number of great consultants and a program that's going to help enormously. And second, rather than regulations, we believe we should use the strategy of crawl, walk, and run. We believe we should focus on the highest density areas first, where we have the problem, and provide pathway speed control guidance to supplement the education program just mentioned, with specific education being bulked up big time for the e-bikers. And we would appreciate your support on this program. Thank you very much, and we appreciate everything you've done on behalf of biking on Hilton Head Island. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Babel. Our next citizen and our final citizen to speak is Mr. Alfred. Mr. Alfred, please mute your background noise and be prepared to make comments. Our final citizen to speak is Mr. Alfred. Mr. Alfred,
yes.
Please mute your background noise. Mr. Alfred, please proceed back and turn off your background noise.
All right, I have done that. You can hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a few of the basic points to deal with in terms of electric bikes. By and large, they are reasonably operated currently, as we observed, and there is no particular reason at this point not to allow them on the pathways. The issue, though, is one of safety, and what that means is speed. E-bikes are capable of going a great deal faster than the average person pedal bike goes. Therefore, it is important that speed limits on the pathways be determined and posted on the pathways where they can be seen at the point at which they need to be taken into account, a so-called point of sale concept. We worked on this for years in sea pines and have concluded that in many instances, pamphlets or other written materials handed out do not have much of an impact when the rider actually gets out on the paths. So we think it is important that speed limit signs be posted. We have a suggested range of the speed, but I think a better way to determine actual speed limits would be by doing a study of what the bicycles are actually doing during the summer and the tourist season and see what that speed is. The speed does not have to be the same and probably shouldn't be the same in various places. We are essentially concerned only with the high volume areas. That's Pope Avenue and portions of 278. And the speed limit on Pope Avenue and the speed limit on 278 can be quite different. We don't think that the governor that exists on e-bikes is the appropriate way to go because those bikes, first of all, it doesn't always work in terms of setting a limit. And second, e-bikes can be ridden elsewhere than on the pathways of Hilton Head Island, and they should be permitted when riding elsewhere to go with their regular speed. And finally, I just simply want to say that we need also to pay attention to the beach. We've had incidences where a group of teenagers were racing on the beach at a time when there were a fair number of toddlers going back and forth from their parents' blanket to the ocean. We very much appreciate your willingness to pursue all this and look forward to what comes up next. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Alfred. And sir, our very last person to speak is Mr. Hall. Mr. Jim Hall is set to speak next, sir. That's our last presenter.
Thank you.
Mr. Hall? Mr. Hall? Sir, Mr. Hall has joined the meeting. However, it appears he's having some difficulty with his microphone. Would you like me to get him submit his comments in writing so I can present them to the committee and then put them in the official record?
Yes, I was hoping that we could get him linked up now, but if not, then let's proceed and ask him to do that. Thank you.
Sounds very good. Thank you, sir. Sir, that concludes appearance by citizens.
All right, thank you very much. The unfinished business first item is the monthly update on the short-term rental initiative. I'd like to just make a couple of very brief comments here. First, to recognize and thank the staff for its incredible research, the amount of work that they've been doing, and the well-run meetings that I think all of us observed in the last week. I also think it would be appropriate to thank the public for their thoughtful and heartfelt, sincere comments and opinions. I know from my standpoint, there were some significant takeaways. One size doesn't fit all on this. People were asking, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? I think that's a challenge to staff and to us to answer. And I also want to assure the people who called in and were concerned about where we were headed, that our goal is not to remake the industry or to shut down short-term rentals on Hilton Head. So with that, I'd like to ask Ann Siren for the staff presentation. Good morning, Ann. How are you?
Good morning. Very well, sir. Thank you so much. I'll share my screen and get started with our presentation. Okay. Good morning. Again, I'm Ann Siren, Interim Comprehensive Planning Manager. And this morning, I'd like to briefly summarize our efforts so far and then discuss our findings and learnings. We've received a tremendous amount of feedback, as Mr. Ames said, on this initiative. And using that information and the information we have on short-term rental trends, we're ready to make some initial recommendations and describe a path forward. We'll review the project purpose statement and timeline before taking a deeper look at short-term rental trends. I'll summarize the feedback we've received and pull together the themes that we've heard. I'll draw conclusions based on feedback we've received and our learnings, and recommend a preliminary policy framework. And I'll recommend a plan for continuing monitoring and analysis of short-term rental trends and their impacts. I'll describe those preliminary recommendations and how we can implement them. And then I'll review our next steps. The short-term rental initiative is part of our recently adopted strategic plan, and the project purpose statement outlines what we're trying to do. We need to develop a fair, balanced, and predictable approach to manage short-term rental impacts. I'll talk about those impacts in a few minutes and try to address the question, do we have a problem? In our project timeline, you'll see that we're finishing our initial first phase of this project with public and stakeholder outreach and data development and research. And I'll discuss the remainder of the project later on. First, as part of our learnings, let's take a look at the trends in short-term rentals in the past 2 years. On this chart, we have data from 3 short-term rental monitoring companies. We anonymize them because they gave us the data as part of software demonstrations. Starting back at the left side of the chart in September of 2019, the companies found there were between 4,000 and 6,000 short-term rentals on the island. In September of 2021, 2 years later, they found that number had increased to between 8,000 and 11,500 units. The blue line on that chart includes quarterly data. And you can see that sharp increase between January 2021 and July 2021, that 6 month period. And that leveled off in the third quarter last year, but it was still increasing. We can confirm this data shortly with our short-term rental monitoring contract, which I'll mention in a minute. If we average those 3 estimates, that's a 96% increase in short-term rentals in 2 years. And that's the equivalent of about 4,800 short-term rental units. Most of these units obviously aren't new builds, they're conversions from existing housing units. For some context, 4,800 units is a little less than the total number of units in Palmetto Dunes. In 2018, we had about 34,500 housing units on the island. As an additional note, short-term rental units are not allowed everywhere on the island. Most of the larger gated communities like Indigo Run don't allow them, but they are allowed in Sea Pines, Shipyard, and Palmetto Dunes. And of course, outside of those large gated communities, individual HOAs and POAs may restrict short-term rentals. So these trend lines show a sharp change in the short-term rental market. And given the size and importance of the short-term rental market on the island, it clearly warrants our attention and further analysis. It's a sudden increase and it's a big change. Is it a problem? Do we have a problem? I think we can draw some preliminary conclusions from this trend data and the feedback that we received, which I'll discuss in a minute. Regarding data acquisition, we've decided to work with AirDNA to provide constant monitoring of short-term rental properties. Their initial data will be available by the end of this month. This will give us a comprehensive picture of short-term rentals, including the total number of rentals. And that data will be captured by month, starting from November 2014 to today. We'll have a wide variety of data. So on the listing type, so single family versus multifamily home, location, maximum occupancy, number of bedrooms, the date the property was first offered as a short-term rental, again, going back to 2014, the time of year the properties are rented, and the number of nights rented per year. We'll also have monthly performance information for short-term rentals, like total reservation days and occupancy. With that information, we can do a deeper dive on short-term rental trends by location, not just absolute numbers. And we can use AirDNA to continue to monitor short-term rental trends. So will that sharp increase in short-term rental trends repeat itself or continue? Probably not at the same rate as that January to July 2021 data. We already saw that blue line was leveling off, but it was still increasing. And will that increase continue, or has the market settled? This information will be very useful as we continue to monitor short-term rentals using AirDNA. The short-term rental trends were part of what we considered, used to consider the current state of short-term rentals. The other input was stakeholder feedback. So starting in October, we held 19 open houses, individual meetings, and group meetings with stakeholders. We sought a broad range of input from the large gated communities that allow short-term rentals to realtors, the Chamber of Commerce, property management companies, and neighborhood representatives. And this continues the list of stakeholder meetings that you've seen before. And here we have a summary of the meetings we held last week. We had about 500 people attend the 5 meetings that we had last week. And let me just take a quick second to recognize the staff team that helped organize and run those meetings, because they did an amazing job. And I really appreciate their being part of our team. The videos from last week's meeting are now online, and we'll add the notes and Q&A from those meetings shortly as well. What we heard in those meetings was largely what we've heard before. The same themes, the same problems and concerns are resonating again and again, and I'll discuss those in a minute. We'll wrap up our phase 1 round of stakeholder meetings and hold one more open house next week. And we're looking forward to the feedback that we'll get on our initial recommendations during those meetings. We've had an overwhelming response to our survey. We've now received actually over 3,000 responses. This slide is a little out of date. And everyone can view the survey responses on that same page that they used to take the survey. I want to acknowledge and thank everyone who's taken time out of their day to tell us what their concerns are, to ask questions and educate us. And it's invaluable to have the kind of input and information we received. So while feedback could be very specific and detailed, what we heard also fell into themes. The first and possibly most important point I want to make is one that is obvious, but sometimes obvious points need to be said out loud. As Jocelyn Stager with the Hilton Head Area Association of Realtors said, we can't just focus on problems. We need to also focus on the benefits that short-term rentals provide. Everyone we spoke with acknowledged that short-term rentals are integral to the island's economy and its character. Short-term rental owners subsidize full-time residents' taxes. They pay A-tax fees. They increase property values, and they stimulate the local economy. They also help build Hilton Head Island's long-term resident community. So many of our full-time residents started out as either guests in someone else's short-term rental, or they purchased a house or a condo that they eventually wanted to move into. And in the meantime, they rented out on a short-term basis. So to be clear, no one wants to do away with short-term rentals. We also heard people ask, why are you doing this? What's the problem? Do we have a problem? And we certainly heard from folks who think there's no problem at all. Someone in their survey response said, fine as is. But we heard from people who are experiencing the strain that short-term rentals have put on their neighborhoods. During a stakeholder meeting last week, Mr. McCammon, who is a longtime resident, described how the behavior of guests in a short-term rental next to his home had severely and negatively impacted his life. We've heard and read complaints about quality of life issues like these again and again. There are too many vehicles and they park on the street, or they park in the yard, or they park in my yard. Renters play loud music and they party, which I can hear inside my house. And they leave trash out or they litter. If you ask, do we have a problem based on the trends we've seen and the feedback we've received, I would say with the dramatic increase in the number of short-term rental units in the past few years, there's an even greater need to address quality of life issues by requiring a basic level of operation and management for short-term rental properties. Many short-term rental property owners have responded to this by saying, not my rental. I take pride in owning well-maintained property. I have occupancy limits. I require minimum night stay. I screen my guests. I respond to calls from my neighbors about complaints. And I think that's true. Many short-term rental property owners, they manage their properties well. And I think that shows that no one finds these kind of nuisances acceptable. We've also heard and read concerns about deeper rooted issues, like the decline of residential neighborhoods as they transition into commercial districts full of almost mini hotels. This includes neighborhoods inside the larger gated communities that allow short-term rentals and those outside gated communities, like North Forest Beach and Follyfield. Some of the other deeper rooted issues we've heard about include the impacts of the rising number of short-term rentals on housing availability, on the quality of the environment, on infrastructure like roads and water and sewer use, on the island's brand, and on the value of short-term rentals themselves. Will the market be saturated at some point, and will the average night stay then fall? If you ask, do we have a problem with these issues? The answer is, I'm not sure we know yet. There's certainly been a change in short-term rentals, and there's certainly some amount of encroachment on traditional neighborhoods, some amount of additional burden on the environment and our infrastructure, and there could be some market saturation, but we don't have enough information yet to know. So we've considered all this feedback and what we know about trends in short-term rentals to develop some preliminary findings. If you're following along with your own copy of the presentation, I revised this slide and added the next slide after the presentation was published. So those won't be in your materials. And a copy of the revised presentation will be available on the town's website after this meeting. We have found that there is strong support for an ordinance to address the organization, character, expectations, and operations of most short-term rentals. Most folks agree, as Jack Daly said during one of the stakeholder meetings last week, that there needs to be some sort of basic level of expectations for short-term rentals. I would refer you to the feedback in the surveys, the stakeholder meetings and open houses, and the calls and emails that we've received that echo this sentiment. We also found that at this time, there is limited support for an ordinance that would significantly impact the operations of short-term rentals before we fully understand and evaluate the problem and the results of the actions that we might take. If you ask, do we have a problem with the total number of short-term rentals on the island? I would say, I don't have enough information to know that yet. But the recent rise in the number of short-term rentals certainly warrants further monitoring and consideration. As we have more information on short-term rental trends through our continuous monitoring contract, and as we gather more information through the island-wide conditions and trends assessment, we can evaluate the sort of larger concerns like the quality of traditional single-family neighborhoods, the reduction in the amount of worker housing with the simultaneous increase in demand for workers brought on by the visitors in those short-term rentals, the burden on infrastructure of more visitors, and the impact on the environment. So based on the feedback we've received and our learnings to date, staff is recommending a preliminary policy framework. This includes standards for property management, safety, noise, trash, and parking. I'll detail each of these first before describing how this information would be submitted with the town's business license application for a short-term rental. Regarding property management, we want to create a standard that owners or their agents be available to address problems within an hour of being notified. The agent can be anyone the owner designates who can respond, and that includes, family members or friends. The key is that someone is available to respond within an hour. The contact information for that person would be posted outside of the unit so folks know who to contact in case of a problem. Many communities require this, and it reflects what we've heard in stakeholder meetings and read in the surveys. When neighbors have a problem with renters, they want a point of contact who will handle the issue in a reasonable amount of time. Regarding safety, we recommend requiring owners to affirm that their units meet basic safety requirements, like fire prevention and escape routes and pool safety standards. If pool fencing would violate private covenants, we would exempt those properties from that requirement or find an alternative safety option that doesn't violate the covenants. I'm sure we'll refine this as we receive feedback, but there should be some basic life safety measures for each unit. Similarly, we recommend requiring owners to affirm that they have notified guests of the town's noise standards and post that in the units. We recommend that owners affirm that they have a designated location, either a service yard or a dumpster, depending on the development, for trash, and that they clearly display the instructions about how to take care of the trash inside the unit. Regarding parking, we recommend requiring that all vehicles be parked on site in compliant spaces and that the number of vehicles be limited to 6. Now, there may be some larger properties that could truly reasonably accommodate more than 6 vehicles. And I think we need to discuss some options for those properties. I think those are largely outliers. I think those would be the exception. I think most people, 6 parking spaces make sense. So those are the elements of the policy framework. You can see from the survey responses, from feedback from short-term rental management companies, there's a letter from Sea Pines Resort in your packet, that there may be questions about some of the specifics, and we still need to iron out the details, but there's still strong support for some basic universal standards for how short-term rentals operate.
And this is Sean. Can I jump in for just 1 second?
Yes, sir.
To clarify on the parking number, the maximum number of passes that can be issued by an owner to renters is 6. If the unit has less than 6 parking spaces, they would be limited by that number. So if there's 2 parking spaces, it would be 2 passes, 4 parking spaces, 4 passes, but no more than 6 is what we're recommending at this point. So I want to make sure there's that clarification.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate you clarifying that. As I've said before, many short-term rental owners have told us, I already take care of my property. For those folks, meeting these requirements should only involve submitting some additional paperwork with their business license. Now, let me explain when and how this would go into effect. Since all short-term rentals must have a town business license, it makes sense to include the required information with the business license application instead of requiring a separate registration. This wouldn't require an additional fee. The owner would simply add the information to their business license application, affirming that they meet these requirements. We recommend the effective date of the ordinance be July 1st, 2022. So what does that mean? That means everyone who already has a 2022 business license or who has submitted a business license application by July 1st, 2022 would not have to submit the additional paperwork confirming they meet the requirements, and they wouldn't have to meet the requirements for the rest of the year. They have or have applied for their 2022 business license before the regulations go into effect. For those who apply for a business license or renew their business license after July 1st, 2022, they would need to submit the required paperwork affirming that they meet these requirements, and they would need to meet those requirements in practice. So let me run through a few scenarios. In the case of a short-term rental owner who already has their business license today, they would not need to submit the additional paperwork confirming they meet the requirements, and they wouldn't have to comply with the requirements until they renew their business license in January 2023. So starting in January 2023, They have to submit the paperwork and they have to meet the requirements. For a short-term rental owner who submits their business license application before July 1st, 2022, they wouldn't need to submit the additional paperwork or comply with the requirements again until they renew their business license in January of 2023. And again, in January 2023, they have to comply with the requirements. A short-term rental owner who submits their business license application or who renews their business license after July 1st, 2022, would need to submit the additional paperwork confirming that they meet the requirements. And they would need to comply with those requirements right away. So the town will provide a good neighbor brochure to be displayed in units. This is very common in other communities, and we could discuss making it optional for those who already display the rules and regulations that we're requiring on the brochure. And those rules and regulations would be, here's where you put your trash, here's parking, here's where you park for the unit. Here are the noise standards. Please be a good neighbor and don't violate those. And as with all town regulations, the goal of the ordinance would be voluntary compliance through education. We have a huge number of short-term rentals on the island, and it's going to take folks a while to get up to speed with the new regulations, and we can help them do that. However, if a property owner repeatedly fails to meet the basic standards for their business, town council could consider revoking their business license. And just a note, we've already received some preliminary feedback on these recommendations from stakeholders. I'm interested to hear what the committee has to say as well. For the next steps for this project, we'll share that short-term rental data with you by January 31st. Again, we're concluding our stakeholder meetings and we'll have our last open house next week. And so to conclude, we have a number of requests for your consideration. We're requesting feedback and direction on the preliminary policy framework. And then, do you support the effective date of July 1st for an ordinance? And do you support our recommendation to continue to monitor short-term rental trends and gathering more data to evaluate those deeper rooted issues, such as impacts on residential neighborhoods, housing availability, infrastructure, and the environment? Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ann. Can you douse the screen, please?
Yes, sir.
Well done. I'll withhold my comments until I hear from other members of the Public Planning Committee. Glenn, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you. And this is an outstanding presentation that you've given. The exhaustive amount of work that you and your colleagues on the staff have put in is outstanding, and I sincerely appreciate your hard work and efforts here. I think that you have gone through and broken down a complicated problem into some realistic action steps for us to take moving forward with this. I hear about it all the time. I'm sure that my other colleagues on the council hear about it all the time. That said, I recognize and support the industry here that provides these rental homes. I recognize that it's a vital part of our community economy, and we're not trying to break that business or stop that business. What I think is happening here is that we have a few outliers or people who abuse the privilege and cause harm to the other short-term rentals that may be nearby. But what we hear constantly is from residents who live next to or across the street from one of these places where there is constant noise and abuse. And so I think that you have laid out some constructive steps in dealing with this. I recognize we're talking about a big change here on this island. And while I wish we could snap our fingers and adopt an ordinance, I think that your approach is a rational and proper one for us to use moving forward. A key aspect of this problem for the town is enforcement. We have an inadequate number of enforcement officers. They do a great job, but they have more jobs than they can possibly do. I have spoken with the town manager, and I expect that in our upcoming budget, we're going to see an allocation for a significant increase in enforcement. I think that we need to see whether that enforcement actually bears fruit in solving the problem that's created by the relatively small number of people who abuse the privilege of renting their homes. As I say, I'm a free business guy. I believe in that. I think it makes perfectly good sense for us to move forward in most of the ways that you have outlined. One idea that I've had is that somehow this representative of a property be the person who would be subjected to penalties, to make that person work to control his or her friends that are in these properties. That way, we make them more self-regulating. I can say that I haven't fully developed that idea at all, and it may not work or it may not be enforceable, but it is something that has occurred to me. I think that we need to have a progression of penalties for violations. I recognize that being the good guys around here, we usually issue warnings and we don't issue fines until there's significant abuse. But I think that after a warning, there should be a significant fine, and we should determine who that fine would be assessed upon, whether it is the owner, whether it is the management company, or whether it is a designated tenant or guest representative. And that progression of fines start pretty significantly. Something like $250 for the first fine, and then progressively moving up from that, so that down to the point of saying, I'm sorry, this house is closed now, you must leave. And that's going to be painful. Then with regard to the parking aspect of this, I understand and I hear what we're saying about limiting the number of parking spaces for most of the units, not all of the units, but most of the units. That's a really difficult enforcement problem. It may be hard to determine if a car that's improperly parked is in fact the car of one of the guests who is in the home versus someone else. So we got some real tough enforcement issues for our enforcers out here. So in summary, I think that you've done a really good job in gathering information. I continue to applaud the town for all of the efforts of reaching out to find public opinion as well as industry opinion on issues like this, so that we're not operating based upon the proverbial seat of our pants, but rather we have real data, real input, and real action here. My biggest concern has to do with island residents who are in their homes and find their homes to be unlivable, primarily during the high season here. And that's where enforcement is so vital, and there needs to be significant penalties for those few who abuse it. So David, I think those are my preliminary comments on this. Didn't sound very preliminary, but I have given this some thought, so thank you.
Here you have. Thanks, Glenn. Tamara?
So I have quite a few thoughts. and comments. And thank you for your patience and time while I go through them. And I hope I put them in some order that makes sense, but I may skip around a little bit. I think a word that Glenn used kind of struck a note with me, so I'm going to pick up there. A big change. The big change that has occurred, as you can see from the graph that was presented, is the dramatic increase in short-term rentals. I think it was the blue line that showed us that we've nearly doubled the number of short-term rentals available. That's a big change. That's a big change in terms of how it impacts our residents, which is, and properly so, should be our first concern here. There are a number of residential neighborhoods whose own overlay districts, covenants, et cetera, should be the determining material that goes back as to whether or not this should be allowed. Follyfield, for one's character overlay district, emphasizes that it exists to protect the single family residential character of the district, and in particular the development and redevelopment of the lots within the district, and that all new development changes to existing development district are subject to the overlay district regulations. And I wonder if the big change is that we've maybe forgotten some of that. And I'll lay part of the blame on the town. So while we're busy now trying to find ways to manage, control, turn back time, each day there are permits that are approved that allow for what are being called single family homes in residential neighborhoods that might fit this character development that I just mentioned. But in fact, we know it's not true. We know that in fact, 9, 10 bedroom homes, 12 bathrooms, 4 laundry rooms, or a laundry room on each floor, that those are mini hotels. So that doesn't fit in. So that's the big change, that the town has allowed this, and today the town is allowing it. That in one particular neighborhood and an adjacent neighborhood, small area, there are 8 open permits. One that comes to mind that may not be a rental, but the rest are, with an average of 9 bedrooms per house, mini hotels in a residential neighborhood. That's the big change that we, as this committee and the town council, has to address. It's not a question as to whether or not this has become a negative influence on the quality of life on Hilton Head. That is without question. This is not anecdotal information that we should get shared with us occasionally. This is an ongoing plead for help by the residents of the town. And just to set a matter straight, which drives me crazy, permanent residents here do pay 4%, and short-term rental or part-time residents pay 6%. That's not a town issue change. You're supporting the schools, correct, but you're not helping in that regard to help support our local town taxes. And people need to be clear on what the fees and the taxes are really paying. For instance, one of the things, the fees that short-term rentals don't pay for is they don't help to put money back into the neighborhoods, these very neighborhoods that they literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people into, that disrupt the quality of life and challenge the infrastructure of the neighborhoods and put the neighborhoods at risk in many cases. They don't put money back into those neighborhoods to help with beach access, private beach accesses that they abuse and use far more dramatically than the residents of the neighborhood, as one example. So I think that's the big change, right? That's the crux of it. How do you protect our island from being something other outside of the gates, inside of the gates with palmetto dunes and sea pines and Shipyard, from just being anywhere that's not necessarily for residents anymore. Here's some other places I'd like to go, just based on the very well presented slides that Ann narrated, and as always, what a great job. But let me pick up on the fees, since we were just talking about that. Fees that maybe should be included are for returning some of that money to the neighborhoods. Business license fees that maybe should be increased for short-term rentals, because there are added costs that the town bears for the constant and dramatic use. The compliance issue that was raised as a question, I have very strong feelings that regardless of when you get your business license, you need to come in and show compliance for this upcoming year. Again, the residents have asked for help, and they don't mean in 2023. They need help now. And so the simple list of issues in the presentation ought to be no trouble for short-term rental owners to comply with starting this year. And in that compliance, one of the things that struck me was the parking pass issue. In a number of places, yes, parking passes, and I know Palmetto Dunes has a restriction of their own for short-term rentals in terms of how many parking passes they will allow. But in other areas, there are no parking passes to be issued. So is it the suggestion, and maybe this is a question for better clarification, is it a suggestion that each property owner would provide a parking pass, even though a parking pass may not be necessary within the neighborhood or the district that they're in? And if that's the case, what is that based on? 6 parking passes? Wouldn't it be another idea that a number of parking places really ought to be tied to the number of bedrooms, the square footage of a home, the amount of space? When you say on site, do you mean on site of the actual property, or do you mean on site on the property on the street or an adjacent empty lot? Or do you mean down the street, as is the case? This is a current issue fact that has been brought to my attention, where when there's not enough space at the rental, they're down in our parks, parking in spaces that we have set aside for residents to go to the park or the beach, or our visitors to the island who may be here on a daily basis. So that in and of itself is another thought and a consideration that I'm not sure we've addressed, but is an issue. So parking passes is clearly, in my mind, not settled, and in terms of part of this preliminary line of thought hasn't been, it needs to be readdressed. Trash, in the presentation, there was a number of different ways trash could be handled. One word that caught my attention is a dumpster. Now, I realize that behind the gates, there will be regulations, you can't put a dumpster. I realize that perhaps within some covenant neighborhoods outside of gates where there are covenants, you can't put a dumpster, but they may not be true across the board. And so clearly dumpsters should be removed, or else I could imagine a scenario where we have dumpsters in front yards. I would ask also that whatever trash is containment is required, that it be concealed. As we know, our daily trash as a homeowner, we keep it concealed we take care of our neighborhoods, but I can imagine, and I believe it's true, some renters have an awful lot of extra trash and it overflows the 2 or 3 or maybe 4 garbage cans that are available. I would ask, and I think I've asked before, that we consider the noise ordinance. While I understand the town has a noise ordinance of 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., that does not necessarily help us to maintain peace and quality of life for residents between those. I'm not sure who's picking up, but that extra voice wasn't mine. That we consider how our noise ordinance is really helping to manage the excessive amount of noise that might come from some of these short-term rentals. And I say that, and this as an example, when we as residents are hosting a party, right, or we're expecting a large gathering at our home, generally it's a nice neighborly thing to do. Go knock on your neighbor's door, put a note in the mailbox saying, we're expecting guests, come join us, we'd love to have you, but just know that we might be a little bit loud. We apologize in advance. It might be a little bit late. There may be a few extra cars. Thank you for your patience, but it's a one and done. That isn't the case when you have a short-term rental next to you. This is week after week after week. These are situations where, in fact, another point that could be attached to it, some rental agencies, some homeowners who have a number of rental units in the same neighborhood, adjacent to each other, however that might present itself, rent 2 and 3 homes as not only family reunions, but event places. So you could find that there are 50 available rooms in a small strip in a residential neighborhood, and that they could be rented all together. Now, if that's not a short term, if that's not a mini hotel, if not boutique hotel, I don't know what else is. And so, again, that noise on a week after week after week basis has to have some other mechanism of control rather than our town's ordinance of 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and what we otherwise would have thought of as a one and done type of gathering. So that's a point on that I wanted to make. And I apologize if I'm taking a bit of time, but as you know, this is an incredibly important issue with a lot of concern by our residents of this island. We saw a slide about safety, and I appreciate and value what I saw in those safety slides, because I think it's absolutely imperative that if you're inviting people week after week in large numbers, as we've seen, into your home, that you provide that safety, and that we as a town and us as a council have an absolute paramount duty to ensure that there are safety mechanisms that we've required. You mentioned fences around pools if it's not in violation of a covenant, and that certainly makes sense. I wonder, and this is a question, and I would just ask it as a question, how does that relate to elevated pools where there's a lot of, where there's living going on and entertaining in a home, and we all know the tragic accident that happened, and a pool right outside the door on an elevated level, and how that gets secured under those safety regulations. So just a question mark, a point and a question mark there. Boy, I could go on, and I think I probably am going to one last one because this one I think is important, and Glenn picked up on it too. I apologize, but I am going to just ask for 1 more minute, and then I'm going to have a comment. Repeated violations was mentioned. Glenn mentioned some thoughts that he had with regard to some fines and how that gets has an impact in terms of how it would change behavior. I heard that if there were repeated violations, that a license could get pulled if that's what town council wants to do. So that whole stream under there really needs to have far more structure put to it. And God bless you, Bill. Far more structure put to it. What is repeated violations? Is that 1? Is that 2? Is it 3? Is there a varying slide that, oh, your trash was out, that's 1 point, the noise was 2 points, whatever. How does that work? I don't understand any structure underneath that. And how quickly does that work? I have grave concerns about that piece being relied on the point designated for contact. If someone should have an issue, if they're the ones who would be being fined, I think you're gonna have few people who want to do that. If it's the property manager, I could see them just passing on the cost to their client. I see this as just it's a write-off mechanism.
Tammy, I'm going to have to
Go
ask you
ahead.
to make your comment. I'm going to have to ask you with all due respect to
Well,
make your
here's
final
the problem, David. We're in the midst of looking for thoughts about passing this on as a first step. And that first step does not address these issues at this point. In fact, we have stakeholder meetings that are going on into the beginning of February, and data that we're not expecting to receive until January 31st. And so how we're making a suggestion about where we move on to, we're not fully prepared for that. Moreover, the emphasis has not been on correcting the issues at hand for the residents of the island. While I understand there's an awful lot of stakeholder meetings here that are directed at twice the amount of time provided to residents, stakeholders within the realm of short-term rental owners and others has been given a far more time. And I think based on this preliminary presentation, a bit more consideration. These preliminary first steps need to have some surety going into it that there'll be some change, big change in reversing where we are now to return to this island some peace and some safety and some quality of life to the residents who are here every day supporting our businesses and our economy and our brand. And I don't think if we do anything less, we're doing our job properly. So I understand that I talk a lot, and I talk a lot because there are a lot of people talking to me, and this is what they've asked me for. So I'll take my stand down now and return at another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Staff has asked us today to provide direction on a policy framework July 1st and monitoring data. I'm going to let Alex comment, but I just wanted to insert this. I see our challenge today like looking at a compass. We're being asked by staff to decide what direction we're going to go. And so this is a pretty broad consideration. And when I'm looking at this framework, July 1st and monitoring, I think we can make that happen. Alex, what are your thoughts on these?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make sure that there was not a third that staff was asking us about. Is that correct? It's just the moving forward with a July 1st target date and the monitoring. Is that correct?
And the policy framework. The policy framework are those items that Ann went through.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. I'll start with with thanking staff for working very diligently to get as much information gathered as they have thus far, and being so accommodating to those that wanted to participate. And the name of the company that we are engaging with, can you give me that again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yes, sir. That's Air DNA.
Air DNA. Thank you very much. I'll start with this, Mr. Chairman. Councilman Stanford mentioned that that he hears the problems quite often, and obviously Councilwoman Becker does also. So I appreciate the staff coming up with the problem statement, okay? And the piece that really sticks in my mind is the attempt to address the imbalance, okay? Because I can safely say that in Ward 1 at least, I have not heard as much as my colleagues have heard. Not to say that we don't have an issue, I'm just stating the fact that we are talking about an imbalance here, right? And the threat of more imbalance as far as this situation is concerned. So the framework for me, I think we're going in the right direction. Us attempting to have something in place by July 1st is not necessarily threatening in my mind. But the monitoring piece, I think, is so important. You know, we have just scratched the surface in my mind as far as monitoring is concerned. You mentioned that we'll have more data moving forward after the 31st with some specifics. And the one that I want to speak to is the, I guess, the geographic and location piece, all right? Obviously, there are going to be areas that are already concentrated with short-term rentals. And obviously, there are going to be areas that are not. And as that information is presented to us, I think it'd be important that we can see that visually, okay? So that we can really focus in on the areas of problem, not with just the nuances, but also with the threat of the imbalance furthering itself, okay? I think that would be important for us along the way. And the last thing that I'll say is, to a large degree, this is a byproduct of demand, okay? And, you know, maybe it's a curse of our own success to a degree. Everybody wants to come to Hilton Head for a piece of paradise for a short period of time. But I think the real issue comes to the competition between a full-time resident and a short-term resident. And I think part of the monitoring and part of this discussion has to go back to the way that we are marketing our island. If we are putting 90 to 100% of our effort into getting people to come here for a week, then the demand is going to continue and the imbalance may continue. So during the monitoring process, I think the marketing strategy around Hilton Head being a place to also come and live has to be a part of the discussion if we're going to balance this off. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair, and I am in support of staff moving forward in the direction that they have put in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. We're being asked to green light a policy framework, July 1st date, and monitoring data. I'm comfortable with the direction staff has outlined for policy framework. I don't believe that what is there today is 100%, and I suspect that as more people in the community look at the policy framework, there'll be some changes made. I have thoughts about the parking passes. I didn't really understand that one either. I think trash is always going to be a challenge because of the pickup cycles of the private companies. I don't know how that's handled. I think there's a significant difference in our conversations around condos and single-family homes. I think we have to recognize that. And then the issue of accountability. Glenn brought that up. I think that needs further conversation. Who really is in charge of maintaining the quality of the facility and of the experience? And we need to think about that, I think, more broadly and perhaps spend a little bit more time on that. To me, this is an opportunity for council to put something out in front of the community and saying, this is what we've heard, this is the direction we're going. And so I think it's a prudent recommendation on the part of staff to ask us to forward the policy framework, the July 1st date, and the monitoring of data. And so with that, is there somebody who would be willing to make a motion to that effect?
Mr. Ames, can I just clarify very quickly before you make your motion?
Please.
I just want to make sure that we are clear that we're asking to bring forward an ordinance to implement that framework at your February meeting. That would be our intention, if you're comfortable with that time frame. Thank you, sir.
Yes, but again, that is an opportunity for us as a committee to read something that is more specific than what you have today.
Of course, sir. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
David, I have a comment and then I'll be glad to make a motion if I might.
Thank you, Glenn.
The comment is, I am troubled by the idea of not requiring all licensed short-term rental operators to at least meet the minimum standards that we're talking about by posting this paperwork and so forth, having them do that effective July 1. Everyone does that. And then after that, we'll be monitoring and moving forward. What I'm saying is, there are a lot of people that have already put in their license and they're going to be exempt from having to post safety rules and the like, and that troubles me.
Sean or Ann, is there any legal dimension to what Glenn just said?
I think there may be, and we'll want to take a look at that. We had a brief discussion about that with our consulting attorney and with Curtis Coltrane yesterday. And when we bring forward an ordinance to you in February, we'll have teased that out and understand the implications of that recommendation.
I think that would be something that we would want teased out. Is that something that we could do if council wants to do that?
Yes, sir, of course.
And Mr. Chairman, that's what we're looking at, so that upon the subsequent renewal after the July 1st date, the expectation is that short-term rentals will need to meet those requirements. And we'll confirm that before your next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
David, that said, I would move that the council direct staff to move forward with a framework with an eye to reviewing an ordinance at our next council meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
I have two things. One is, from this conversation, what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, an opportunity between here and when this would come forth as an ordinance to better clarify and perhaps change a number of the issues. I'm hoping. I heard one follow up on one of my concerns, and that was good. But some of the concerns that I brought forth, or is there no room for change between here and there? I personally don't think we're ready. I personally think that you get these items, these number of questions that I've brought up, and others have brought up, clarified before we move on. That's a big question for me. So can someone clarify that for me? I think I went into this meeting having said, you know, progress for the sake of progress isn't really progress. And while I understand this is something, it leaves a lot of gaping holes, and I'm not sure it necessarily provides the residents the answers that they were looking for, or even maybe some of the answers they were looking for. And then just on a side note, one of the things that I didn't get to is what I heard in the presentation was that the town would provide a good neighbor brochure to these rental companies. Is my understanding from that is the town will pay for the creation of and the distribution of a good neighbor pamphlet, and it would only be required then in short-term residents that didn't already provide a similar type of document. And how would we know that? And the emphasis on this for me is that we seem to, maybe it's my perception of this, but we seem to, not just here, but in other situations, taking a step and another step further into more and more accommodation of visitors to the island. And while they're appreciated, don't get me wrong, that's not my emphasis here. The visitors are very appreciated. I'm a longtime visitor since '83, homeowner, property owner, and now involved in our community to the best of my ability. But what I'm hearing is more and more steps to the accommodation and expansion of our town into subsidizing our visitors. So is that a town expense is really where I'm getting at.
David, can I clarify my motion?
Let me just get Sean's point on that, and then I'll go back to it.
Sure.
Well, I appreciate everyone's comments and input. You know, again, based on what we have learned through all of the public input, what other communities have done, you know, and looking at air DNA, you know, significant portion of the short-term rentals are 2 and 3 bedroom units. And right now we're dealing with a much more rapid conversion of single family or existing units to short-term rentals and a lot of new development. And I certainly understand Councilman Becker's position on new development and these large homes. It's something we can't solve immediately. And I think what we're trying to get at is this good neighbor approach with this early action items can help set expectations for what we're seeing in conversion of traditional units as single family or long-term rentals, and set expectations for the short-term rental piece. And then we can continue. I'm looking at the AirDNA website right now, and Councilman Brown, a lot of your comments are right there. Distribution of units, everything is listed. Once we really can understand the trends, the conversion of existing versus new development, we'll get a better handle on these other policy options that we'll have down the road. Other communities have caps and restriction from zoning districts. I just don't think we're in a position yet to recommend those changes. What we're asking for is this early action item does not preclude future policy consideration. I know we'll be talking with the committee and council and the community on these other issues as we continue to monitor and evaluate. But I think it's important to make sure we set expectations as we see this trend continue, especially in conversion, and work to address those in the shorter term and look at longer term solutions if needed, right? Through additional work with committee and the community and council to set that policy. So I just want to make sure that's kind of where we're at. And as far as the brochure, we can provide electronic copy as part of the business license process. You know, we may provide some paper copies as well. I mean, I think it's incumbent upon us. We're collecting a fee. That's revenue that we'll be collecting. And I think we should support the short-term rental and business license operations to make sure everyone understands the expectations, and we're doing our job to inform the community owners, renters, and the like. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify some of those points.
Thank you, Sean. Glenn?
Yes.
You're on mute. Glenn.
Sorry. As a point of clarification, all my motion does is direct staff to come forward with an ordinance based upon the points that Ann has so expertly raised. We are not approving those. We are not limiting what other actions we could take there. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Krista, would you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to. Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mrs. Becker,
So I'm going to say two things and then vote against the motion. I'm going to say one, that there's enough of in the well-presented presentation today that is not complete, doesn't have the kind of answers that I think we need. And then two, we have ongoing stakeholder meetings. And so by doing this at this point without having all of their voices heard, we are truly just discounting them at this point. And I think that's unfair. And so I'm going to vote no.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
and Mr. Ames.
Yes.
Motion carries 3-1.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the help on that and comments. Item number 2, Park and Study Master Plan, directions on implementation. Is there a staff report on that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Good morning and welcome to the committee. If I can here, I will try to share my screen so I can pull up the presentation that we have with you for today. Everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I'll try to cover some of this fairly quickly, as I know you've seen a number of this information before, and then we'll focus on some of the new information that we have in regards to this project. As an outline of today's presentation that we've prepared for you, just want to touch briefly on, again, reviewing the project summary, what it is that we're trying to accomplish through our efforts in this area. Provide a brief overview of the project history and what we've been working on to date, which sets then the basis for where we're hopefully going with this particular item. Continue to review of public comments that we've received in this area. Overview again the project timeline, first as originally introduced and as we are presenting it to you today. And then I want to highlight the project updates that we've had since our last meeting on this issue. And then finally, we're going to cover what our staff proposed action plan is in terms of preparing for the 2022 beach season. So the project summary, Town Council identified as a priority initiative the need to develop a comprehensive beach parking plan that addresses community concerns regarding parking access, availability, communications, management, and overall experience in order to make ourselves better than what we currently are today. In project history, the town hired Walker Consultants to deliver a unified beach parking master plan. That plan was subsequently adopted by Town Council back November 4th. Following that adoption, we've had a number of meetings with the Public Planning Committee to receive advice and guidance on how we continue to pursue this issue. Several months ago, we held a series of public workshops to continue to get stakeholder feedback and comments, particularly around the area of the Low Country Celebration Park and Coligny Beach area. And then we also held a session at the Hilton Head Library to get more information, again, from various geographic areas of the island. At the last Public Planning Committee meeting in December, staff was directed, at the last Public Planning meeting in December, staff was directed to prepare and issue a request for qualifications to identify a vendor that will assist the town in ultimately scoping and potentially then implementing its parking management program. In reviewing the public comments that we received, we've taken and kind of organized these by subject matter. We've received a wide variety of comments, but they do kind of fall within similar buckets. The first being that there is not enough capacity to meet the existing demand in certain areas and at certain times of the year. So you can see there that we've received comments about needing more parking spaces, being able to provide the availability for more beach parking, both in Coligny and in other locations. We need to then also look at communications in terms of when that availability is no longer present, how do we get that information into the hands of potential beach goers so that they can make informed decisions with regards to the availability of parking, where they may go to seek out that available parking, and ultimately try to avoid frustration and some of the other issues that come about when they're unable to find available beach parking. We've also heard from a number of the Coligny business owners. They're very concerned about the impacts to their property, to their businesses, if the town should implement paid parking in the Coligny Beach area. They've also identified that one of their concerns is the availability of free parking for their staff and their employees at those businesses, and whether that will or will not be available to them should the town move forward with implementing paid parking. They're also very concerned about creating additional opportunities for remote parking. Again, the ability to create more capacity in and around the Coligny area is certainly not an easy thing to do. So one of the next best alternatives is to try to create these remote parking opportunities and then have sufficient transportation and infrastructure in place to make it as convenient as possible to allow people to use those effectively and still be able to enjoy their beach going experience. And then lastly, question of enforcement. It's something that we've been talking about for quite some time now, but how would we go about enforcing the town's parking restrictions? How would we deal with impacts to surrounding properties and surrounding neighborhoods? Those are all things that when we do identify a qualified vendor, we'll be having some concrete discussions with them about how we would actually go about implementing enforcement in those areas. Quickly review the project timeline. It's identified there above. You'll notice that there are extensions that have been identified in that project timeline. I do want to cover those today. In working with the Walker Consultant Group to scope and prepare our request for qualifications, it became apparent to us that we needed to allow for some additional time because the vendors who are likely going to be submitting responses to this request are going to need more time to prepare the responses. Particularly, it's likely that they're going to need to conduct site visits here in our area to be able to gain information about our existing facilities, the infrastructure that is and is not present. Because we're seeking kind of a comprehensive solution to this, they're going to want to have to explore many different areas if they are going to be able to provide a response that meets all of our identified needs. So having said that, our target is to have a preferred vendor identified in the April or May timeframe. And what we want to make clear with that is, if that is the point in time in which the town council is beginning their discussions to fully scope and then implement the program, we want to make sure that we're setting appropriate expectations that we will not likely have this program implemented by the time that this summer beach season begins, approximately around Memorial Day this year. Project update since the last meeting. The town contracted with Walker Consultants to provide the technical advice and guidance on the drafting of the request for qualifications for the parking management services. That RFQ has been received. It is going to be released today. I've spoken with our procurement manager, and he has assured me that this is going to go out through the state networks, and the various electronic resources that they publish are open solicitations, and it will be on the street as of today. Additionally, staff has drafted responses to the Desmond review of the Walker Consultants report. Those responses have been communicated both to Group, who was the entity that commissioned the Desmond review. Because the implementation of this program is not likely to occur before the start of this summer season, we wanted to take an opportunity to highlight all of the things that we as staff are doing to prepare for this upcoming season as best as we can. And so we want to highlight the fact that we're continuing to improve security enhancements, both at the Coligny Beach parking lot as well as all of the other town beach lots. There's a renewed emphasis on park maintenance improvements, both within the Coligny Beach lot as well as other beach parks. We anticipate using seasonal employees for beach ambassador program and security services. And we are continuing to explore expanded beach parking opportunities so that in addition to having USCB as a remote parking facility, we are looking at the possibility of having other town-owned properties such as Crossings Park, or potentially even the town hall parking lot be available for that purpose, should there be sufficient demand that the USCB capacity would reach its limit. We've also continued to have off and on discussions with some of the churches in the North Forest Beach and Pope Avenue, and we will continue to have those discussions so that if should it become available at some point in time as a viable option, we will pursue a public-private partnership with them. Additionally, we are looking at enhancements to the Palmetto Breeze Beach Shuttle service. Ideally, we are looking to have them not only potentially increase their routes to cover any of the additional remote parking facilities that we may open up, but we're also going to be working with them so that they can include the addition of a pull-behind trailer to their beach shuttle services. One of the comments that we heard in the public feedback is that it's difficult for people to utilize the remote parking facilities when they're trying to bring with them a significant amount of beach gear to the actual beach itself. So in order to help facilitate that and again, improve the ability to use those remote parking facilities, we're going to be asking that they include a pull behind trailer where that beach gear could be loaded onto so that it could go with them as they are shuttled to the beach. Also going to be exploring alternatives for additional transportation options to include, but not be limited to, the use of electric vehicles, golf carts, pedicabs, and any other number or form of shuttle services that might be appropriate to, again, try and create additional capacity to allow for beach goers to use instead of having to find available spots within the beach parking lots. Additionally, we plan on using real-time variable message board communications with the public so that way we can convey important beach information to them, such as the availability of parking or, if necessary, the lack of available parking in a particular area so that we can direct them to another location in which to find the beach parking opportunities. Additionally, we're also going to work on enhancing the marketing of the Palmetto Breeze trolley services so that people are aware of its availability and can then take according use of it. And we're looking to establish a sustainable digital and social media marketing program to enhance the overall beach experience. This means communicating with people via different electronic platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the town's website, the Chamber of Commerce, Palmetto Breeze, and a number of different other various appropriate digital mediums. Lastly, we want to highlight the role of the beach team. Again, this was something that was created by the town manager for our use last year, and we're going to be continuing to expand upon this team and utilizing them in even further manners. So we hired a beach operations manager, Mr. Mark Robson, on July 19th. Again, I mentioned before, we are already in the process of identifying security officers and additional beach ambassadors that we will hopefully be bringing on as seasonal employees to assist the town in both of those areas. Mark and his team have been working on identifying ways in which we can improve our trash collections and litter pickup capabilities in order to respond to citizen comments and feedback that we've received. As is going to be discussed by, I think, Jeff later on, we're looking at a number of both physical and operational improvements specifically identified at Islanders Beach Park, and then will ultimately be at all of the other beach parks as well. This includes improving pedestrian and bicycle access, and then better marketing of all of our beach parks and highlighting the available uses to the public within those beach parks. Also been working to improve the towing company rotation based upon citizen feedback and concerns that were received regarding the lack of payment options should they be involved in the situation in which their vehicle is towed or otherwise moved. We've identified at least a single vendor and are working to identify more vendors who provide that variable payment opportunities that we've been looking for to meet the requests of the citizens. And then lastly, our goal is to better manage parking in designated spaces and deter parking in inappropriate areas such as shoulders and landscaped areas of our town properties and the adjoining communities. Mr. Chairman, that's the update that I've got for the committee today.
Thank you very much, Josh. There's no action to be taken by the committee, but if committee members would like to make a brief statement or question and direct it to Josh, I welcome that. Alex?
No comments or questions at this time. Thank you, sir.
All right. Tamara?
It's been a while since we received the Palmetto Breeze update. Is there one coming?
I believe we've discussed bringing that forward to a committee meeting here within this month or so. I don't have a specific date for you, but yes, those discussions have been occurring.
Okay, thank you.
And Glenn?
I appreciate this updated information. I feel like I know more about what's going on, and I appreciate your report, Josh. Good job.
Josh, I'm very pleased that staff has taken the time to understand what can be done for this season. I really appreciate that. And then just one other comment. You mentioned looking for different ways to move people from remote parking places to the beach. I think if we continue to think about the experience from the time a person gets to the island to the time it takes to get onto the beach, and make that time or those different parts of the sequence as enjoyable as possible. So I really like the emphasis when you mentioned pedicab or golf carts. I don't know where those fit in, but it suggests that we always ought to be looking at making the experience of being on Hilton Head as enjoyable as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Next item on unfinished business is discussion of beach master planning and facilities improvement. Jeff?
Oops. Good morning, Chairman Ames and members of committee. Yeah, back again with this item. I will share my screen. Hold on 1 second. Oops.
You got it.
You see it?
Yep.
Okay, hold on. How do I? Okay. Hold on. I'd like to just look into how to transfer from one side to the other. Well, if this is acceptable, I'll just run through it. Excuse me. Like this. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, we are back today to talk about beach operations with the focus on Islanders Beach Park. This is the fourth time we have come before a council or committee on this item. It originated back in August with a group of citizens, island residents who use Islanders Beach Park, and it come to staff with a list of objectives and mission to recapture this as the residents-only Islanders Beach Park, and a very succinct, well-organized, well-done statement of their objectives. And we've been working with this group since then. And I want to thank them for their courtesy, their professionalism, their passion, et cetera, to move this item forward. We laid out a timeline. First came to the Community Services Public Safety Committee in November. Later came to a town council and then back to Public Planning Committee. And this is the second time at this committee. We've laid out timelines for the items. The policy framework and town council resolutions is the line item in the schedule we're talking about mostly today, and on track to come back to town council in February, hopefully for resolutions on the 5 items we are discussing today. You'll see down at the bottom of the screen, there are some line items for capital improvements. Please know that we have ordered this survey. That should be delivered very soon, within the next couple weeks, which will allow us to design and permit improvements. We've ordered a full survey of everything, tree, topo, property, utilities, et cetera. And we had presented before a list of the capital improvements we hope to achieve, some of which are adding parking spaces, adding a proper sidewalk, pathway, et cetera, in that park. Also, please know that there is an overlook pavilion that was planned for this park. As you walk out on the boardwalk to the beach, at the area near the switchback, as you go down the ramps, we are going to build an open-air pavilion with a covered roof as an overlook for folks who wish to sit in the shade, enjoy the view of the beach, the breeze, etc. We had a pre-construction meeting earlier this week. We have hired a local contractor, Nick's Construction, won the bid, and that is to be completed by May. Since our last meeting, we've received input, the town manager, myself, deputy town manager, et cetera, folks, following this item and expressing their concerns. I think the 2 most prevalent areas of concern have been those that own a secondary residence, taxed at a 6% rate here with Beaufort County. Those folks have expressed a lot of fear and concern that they will not be eligible to buy a beach pass anymore. Please know that the recommendation and the application we are putting forth does make those folks eligible. There are some conditions, though, however, that it cannot be a timeshare unit that is occupied less than 6 months, and it cannot be operated as a short-term rental. But otherwise, if folks own a 6% taxed residence within the town limits, they're perfectly eligible to apply for a beach pass. The other item we heard most about was the notion that if we were to restrict general public access via foot traffic or a bicycle that were non-pass holders, the recommendation originally, as you will recall, was that the beach pass holders would only be provided access on foot or bike via some mechanism of an ID card or something that proved that they were an island resident and they had rights to access the park. Heard a lot from folks in the vicinity, Folly Field, Port Royal area, that they live there and they enjoy access through Islanders Beach Park, and they would be quite concerned if that was to change. This is an overview of the last meeting. That meeting I thought was a very productive meeting. It culminated with 5 motions or action items at the end. I'm going to go through these today. The top 3, I think, are straightforward and relatively easy to address. The bottom 2 are more difficult. And so the items today were the eligibility requirements to apply for a beach parking pass. I think everyone involved, from the citizens group to the committee members to staff, was happy with where this landed. I have that included in the package. We were to set a fee for an annual beach parking pass. I'll get to that. I think that one was vetted well, and we seemed to land at a good spot last meeting. Limiting shuttle access, we have a resolution on that, and again, I think we've landed on a fair and reasonable outcome that folks will accept. The last two were to remove the parking meters at Islanders, contingent on DHEC's authority. You'll recall those meters were placed. There was 25 meters. There was a town council resolution and a contract with DHEC back in 2010, where the town received grant funding of $1 million to support a beach renourishment project. And those 25 public parking spaces were provided within a half-mile of the project limits. And that was the contract we signed. And we have been pursuing that with DHEC, and we received a letter this month stating their position on the matter. The last item is a consideration of restricting pedestrian and bicycle access to the Islanders Beach Park to only those who hold a beach pass. That was discussed, and when staff was directed to seek legal review, we did so. We have a position on that advice from the town attorney, and we can discuss that when we get to this item. For the first item, beach parking pass eligibility, the required documentation. It's on the application we have put forth in your packet. Essentially, it is if you have a South Carolina driver's license and vehicle registration showing that you reside on Hilton Head Island, that will be acceptable. If you own property, 4% or 6%, it can be a timeshare if you reside there greater than 6 months out of the year. Less than 6 months out of the year on a timeshare or a property utilized as a short-term rental will not be eligible to purchase a beach pass. If you have a lease agreement or you rent for greater than 6 months out of the year on Hilton Head Island, you will be considered a resident and be eligible to purchase a beach parking pass. The shuttle vehicles, we made an exception for those shuttle vehicles that may transport residents. These could be assisted living facilities within the town limits, places of worship, or community or civic organizations. These would be such as the Island Rec Center or the Boys and Girls Club that may wish to transport a group of people for a field trip. And lastly there, if you have a valid DMV golf cart registration and wish to purchase a beach parking pass, you can do so. Here's an overview of the privileges and guidance for use. The pass will get you permission to park at the designated spaces at Islanders and Bryson. It's going to be valid for a year. We're going to base this on a calendar year going forward. If you have a valid beach parking pass, you're not required to pay for metered spaces at the beach parking pass or the beach parks. 266 spaces in total, but yeah, you can park there free without repercussions if you have a valid beach parking pass. We're going to limit only 2 passes per address, 2 vehicles per address. Vehicles, you must park in a designated space. We're please asking folks not to park along the road shoulders, anywhere not in a designated space. The pass will only be valid for the vehicle in which it is issued. We strongly encourage folks not to use Scotch tape and transfer the pass from vehicle to vehicle. We'll reserve the right to revoke the pass if we find that happening. We're going to have the passes placed on the windshield going forward instead of the rear bumper by the license plate. This will be for ease of confirmation with the security folks as you enter the park. And if you would happen to have a damaged windshield or something and need a pass to replace that and it's valid, we will surely issue you a replacement pass. Here's the application. I won't go all through this. I just mentioned all of the highlights, but this was included in your packet. We will steer folks to the website. We want to process these online as much as possible. However, please know that we will still accept a mail-in or an in-person application if folks wish to do so. But primarily, we're going to try to get these all done through the website just for logistical and operational functionality. Whoops. The beach parking fee. In the past, I mean, this has been a sticker, a 2-year pass sold for $30. At the last meeting, this was discussed and we landed on a motion that said annual fee of $15. should be reasonable, and that's what we have recommended today. Going forward, the plan for this year, the transition would be that we sell the remaining 21, 22 passes that we have printed up for $15, and they would be valid through the end of this year. So through December 31st, you pay $15, whether you buy it today or you buy it December 30th, it would be valid for that year. Going forward, we will begin issuing the 2023 passes based on approvals from Town Council for an annual basis, and we will change the colors. We'll come up with a good design of the decal and change the colors each year, somewhat like the PUDs do. For ease of enforcement, and 2023 may be green and 2024 may be blue, and so forth. So that is the plan going forward. And as Josh mentioned, we're going to have a beach or a parking master plan consultant on board soon. And a lot of their work will be to address how we do this going forward. Limiting shuttle access. We have a resolution in the packet that will restrict commercial motor vehicles, shuttles from entering the park unless they are Hilton Head Island based and affiliated with an assisted living facility, nonprofits, religious institutions, or civic community groups. We will also put out information with targeted marketing towards those shuttle buses and facilities, timeshares, et cetera, that may wish to transport groups of their patrons to the beach, and we will be directing them to Bryson and Coligny beach parks. The two more challenging items. The first one is removal of the parking meters. We went over the history of these meters. When we last met, we had not received the final determination from DHEC on our request to remove those. Since then, we have, and I included that in your packet. On January 10th, we received, or we were sent a letter from DHEC stating that in order to remove those spaces per our contract, we would have to refund the $1 million that we received as a grant reimbursement. So the options were clear on this side, and we made a recommendation that we wanted to remove the meters, as we discussed with the citizens group. But the options going forward are going to be you retain the meters as is per the contract we signed with DHEC, or pay $1 million and remove the meters, or try to renegotiate some more reasonable resolution. Please know that the town manager and deputy town manager have been in close contact with DHEC officials for months. They have been in contact with our legislators as well, discussing this item. So at town council's direction, we will have to decide which is the best course to address these 25 meters at Islanders Beach Park. To give a little illustration of how those meters were placed and why, if you look at the graphic, and I don't know if you see that yet or not.
And we can
So if
see
you look at the graphic, there is the red line is the limit of the beach fill project in 2011. So the town had a planned project, and when grant funding became available, we accepted the $1 million to include in that beach fill project. It began at, it's the second home site into Port Royal past the Westin Resort, and it went around the hill of the island there. And to receive that grant to place 25 public parking spaces within 1/2 mile of the limits of the beach fill project. So Islanders was the only town property, the only viable public access point and space that we could put parking spaces at the time. So the yellow outline represents Islanders Beach Park, and the blue line you see is 1/2 mile from the very edge or limit of that project. Folly Field Beach Park and public access is the nearest other town property you see down at the bottom left of the screen, a little less than 1 mile away. So that's how we got to where we got. And there were no other good viable places to place the parking. The town council at the time obviously thought it was a good deal to reserve those 25 spaces for public parking in receipt of the $1 million towards the project. And the last item, which is also challenging, was to restrict general public access on foot, non-vehicular traffic, pedestrians or bicycles into this park accessing the beach. And we would do so, we would have to implement a mechanism and enforcement whereby beach pass holders would be issued an ID card or something. This was raised due to a concern of folks coming in, walking down the middle of the drive aisle, et cetera, conflicting with traffic. Please know that we are going to provide a sidewalk or a pathway to resolve that conflict. But in talking about this item at the last meeting, it was determined we should seek legal advice of the town attorney. We have done so. And when this issue is discussed, if we need to go to executive session to hear from the town attorney, we can do so at that time. So moving forward, path to resolution. We'll look for motions and endorsements today and would like to go to town council in February and implement actions based on town council approval.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
At this moment, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss those matters that bear on a legal interpretation and give members of the committee the opportunity to address the town attorney directly.
I would so move, provided we're allowed a 4-minute recess.
I would endorse both parts of your motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it, David.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Ames, just to clarify to those watching on the Facebook Live feed, we will be posting the meeting back onto Facebook Live as soon as the committee comes out of executive session. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, thank you. Do we need to vote on that?
Yes, please.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your right hand, please. Thank you. Appreciate it. 5-minute break.
And
Thank you and
sir,
welcome back
Go
to
ahead.
the public session. Welcome back to the Public Planning Committee's public session, January 27th. Is there a motion or a series of motions to be considered on this matter?
Yes, but first I would clarify, no action was taken in the executive session.
Thank you.
The first is an action item calling for removal of the parking meters at Islanders Beach Park.
Is there a second?
I would move that we not attempt to remove the parking meters at Islanders Beach Park at this time, but continue to try to negotiate a better treatment of this from DHEC. So
Thank
moved.
you. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll
Thank
second
you.
it. Mhm.
Krista, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mrs. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
motion carries.
The second item deals with eligibility requirements for a beach pass. I recommend that the committee recommend forward the eligibility requirements contained in the report we've just reviewed.
Thank you. Is there a second to Glenn's motion? Thank you.
Second.
Please call the roll, Krista.
Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mrs. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
motion carries, sir.
Thank you.
The next motion would be regarding the fee for the annual parking pass. I recommend that the council move forward a recommendation to the full town council to set the annual fee for a beach parking pass at $15, subject to review based upon further developments in the parking management plan.
Thank you. Is there a second on that? Thank you.
Second.
Please call the roll, Krista.
Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mrs. Becker,
Can I ask one clarifying question, Jeff? In your presentation, I may not have heard it correctly. Did you mention something about utilizing leftover current passes for 20 122 for this upcoming season under this new plan?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Becker. For now, we would still utilize the 2-year 21/22 passes. We would just sell them on an annual basis. So they would be good through December 31st of 2022.
So there could be potentially someone who has it from the same pass from 2021 prior to this. Who would
Correct.
have
If they
it
had
fixed
purchased
their
it in
car.
21 for $30, it's still valid.
So in effect, the stipulations of who can get a beach pass would negate them having to comply with that because they already have it affixed to their car, correct? Or did I miss something?
No, ma'am, you're correct. And we would grandfather those in for 2022, but going forward in 23, and all new passes would have to meet the eligibility requirements.
Is there anything we can do to make that different?
It would be a difficult task to go back and look at the passes issued already in 2021 to assess their eligibility requirements and try to revoke those. I think for the time being.
Because they've already paid for them, right?
Yes, yes.
So I'm not sure if the rest of the committee understands my point. I think you probably do. This really pushes the effectiveness of these and this to next year.
Yes,
Right.
I think you're right.
So, okay. I don't know what we say or do about that, but.
Well, let's see how the motion goes, and
Yeah.
if it fails, then we can make the adjustment. Krista, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Stanford,
For the motion,
Mrs. Becker,
Well, with the caveat of what we just discussed, I mean, it's better that we're moving forward on something for any future sales, but, so yes.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Ames.
Yes,
Motion carries, sir.
the next issue relates to restricting pedestrian and bicycle access to Islanders Beach Park. In view of the fact that we cannot lawfully create that restriction, I move that we not move forward restricting pedestrian and bicycle access into Islanders Beach Park, and that the town be encouraged to develop a pedestrian bicycle pathway from the roadway to access into the beach park as soon as possible.
is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a question for Jeff. The research that was done by the residents said that Marco Island has a way of restricting padded bike access for non-residents. Were you able to make a phone call to find out what that's about?
Our beach operations manager has a call in. I researched and Googled the website about the Residence Island Beach of Marco Island. That is a private parcel with a nonprofit corporation, I think, that operates that. What I had learned from the website, you're essentially joining a club. If you prove residency, that you are a resident of Marco Island, you could pay $140 a year and be part of that club and enjoy access to that beach. But my understanding is it is not a public property, and that program or club is not operated by the government.
Thank you, I appreciate that information.
I would point out that's another state, entirely another state's law.
Yeah. Yes,
May I ask a question as well, since we're asking questions on that? Is there any property alongside Islanders Park where a sidewalk could be constructed from directly to the beach without going through the park?
No other properties, within the Islanders tract itself. We're doing a full survey and we're going to look at improvements, infrastructure and recreational and otherwise that we can make in there. But I don't think there's a good simple way to get a standalone pathway or sidewalk from Follyfield Road out to the beach. We have the boardwalk up at the shower, restroom facilities, etc. We have a separate haul road or access road, kind of a dirt sand vehicular access trail over on the side of the barony. But let me see what we can do to best separate pedestrians and bicycles from vehicular traffic and get them as far as we can in.
Jeff, I think that's going in the wrong direction, because either you're going to have non-residents without bathroom facilities, or you're going to have to build 2 sets of bathroom facilities to make the separation or whatever. I'm willing to hear, but I think that's going in the wrong direction to have theirs and ours bathroom. That's not the message we want to be sending out.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting additional bathroom facilities. I was just trying to find some way to keep the traffic and the foot traffic from going through where there's substantial safety concerns. So I agree with Jeff in terms of see the best that he can do with regard to that. And also that it be noted that one of the points of research hasn't been complete. And I think that there were other towns other than just Marco Island that that either have been or I think maybe haven't been yet brought forward to research in terms of how they handle this type of situation. So anyway.
Well, if it's the pleasure of the committee to postpone a vote on this particular item, we could do that.
Yeah, let's do that if that's okay. That'd be my suggestion.
Well, I'm going to let the committee decide.
No, but I agree. That would be my suggestion as well.
So, Glenn, you have a thought on that?
If we don't take some sort of action, we'll continue to have pedestrian and bicycle access into this beach park. So it seems to me there's not much difference between postponing action on this and approving my motion if it were to be approved.
Alex?
Mr. Stanford's already made the motion. I've seconded. I'm prepared to move forward in this fashion.
Okay. Krista, would you call the motion, please?
Certainly, sir. Mr. Stanford,
For the motion,
Mrs. Becker,
No,
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
motion carries 3-1.
All right. Thank you. The next item on the agenda are the e-bikes. Josh, are you going to make a presentation on that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I am prepared to make a presentation. Let me go ahead and share my screen. With the indulgence of the committee, because this information was included in the packet, I am going to take the liberty of kind of hitting the highlights and just kind of skipping right to the meat of this presentation. And now if there are any questions or if somebody wants to review any of the other information, happy to discuss it. But again, I figured I'm just going to jump right into it at this point.
Good.
Let's get here. So at the last meeting on this matter, staff was directed to prepare a survey to the local bicycle rental and sale organizations on the island. That document was completed and it was issued to every business that's currently in our business license inventory that is identified by that category or designation. I will caveat that we don't know that that'll get 100% coverage, because if you have businesses that are engaged in other activities but also offer bicycle rentals, they may not be classified in our business license directory as a bicycle rental entity. But right now we issued somewhere between 35 and 38 separate letters to those organizations to begin getting their comments and feedback. We have started receiving those. I'm going to cover some of those comments here in just a minute. But our goal for today is to ultimately review the public comments that we have and seek authorization from you, similar to today's discussion about the short-term rentals, in essentially just drafting a proposed policy document in the form of a draft ordinance that we can then bring back to the committee for discussion once it's been created. but hopefully get some guidance from you on the policy outlines of that document before we begin drafting it, if that's permissible by the committee. Looking at the public comments that we received, again, want to reemphasize the fact that we received a lot of comments that e-bikes are here. They are here to stay. They are likely not going away in the future, and that they pose some significant benefits to a number of people by offering folks the opportunity to bike that might not otherwise engage in that activity. We just recently learned from one of the stakeholders that the average age of an e-bike renter in their inventory is 54 years old. And so obviously that speaks volumes to the types of people that are looking to have access to these types of equipment. But we also heard from folks, a significant number of folks, that their biggest concerns with e-bikes are the safety implications of their being present, both from a volume standpoint and from an operational standpoint. And so we believe that the policy recommendations that we've come up with at this point allow us to maybe not come up with the perfect solution to every concern that's out there, but to at least begin to take some steps to address those concerns in what will hopefully be some meaningful way, but with the clear understanding that we're going to have to monitor these matters, collect some additional data, and then potentially revisit it in the future to see what additional steps we may need to take or what alternative arrangements we may need to look at. So the one thing that I will say was unanimously conveyed to us and continues to be conveyed to us in the information that we've received is that everybody supports providing more safety and etiquette information to people who are renting and using bicycles on the pathways. Now, that unanimity kind of diverges a little bit when it comes down to whose responsibility is that. Should it be mandatory? Should it be voluntary? But in terms of everybody agreeing that more information along these lines is beneficial, that has been a unanimous sentiment from all parties at this point. So to highlight what we are proposing today is to obtain authorization for the staff to move forward with adopting a proposed policy document in the form of an ordinance that would essentially do several things. One, it would clearly indicate that e-bikes of a certain type would be permissible on the town's pathways, and we would use the state's actions that we previously discussed as the guidelines for that definition, and then require two distinct but we believe reasonable actions beyond that. One would be to require the distribution of bicycle and safety etiquette materials with each rental or sale transaction that would occur on the island. I can tell you that, again, in looking at the feedback from stakeholders, with our e-commerce being the way that it is today, majority of them thought that that would not be much of an imposition on them. They did indicate that they would prefer the town produce that material rather than them having to come up with it on their own. And so with that, we are recommending that when we get to the point of considering the ordinance, we would bring back as an attachment to that what the proposed safety and etiquette guideline documents would look like. And we would prepare those in conjunction with the Bike Walk Hilton Head group as one of our local stakeholders that we would consider to kind of be experts in this area. And then secondarily to that would be to require the use of technology that would limit the maximum speed at which a helper motor would continue to function to a limit of being no greater than 12 miles per hour. And again, want to make sure that we're communicating the feedback that we're receiving. We have heard from certain groups that they're concerned about that. One, from a standpoint that going in and altering the governor or they call it a controller on an e-bike could potentially void a warranty. But we've also heard from other bike shop owners that that does not appear to be the case and that they could in fact use it for that purpose because that is why it exists. But we've also heard again from others that 12 miles per hour may not be the appropriate speed limit. We heard that it needs to be lower. We heard that it needs to be higher for various reasons. We have recommended this just based upon all the information that we've been able to gather as being something of a quote unquote reasonable standard based upon all the information that we've been able to gather. In addressing some of the other concerns, and this would be outside of the policy document itself. So this is not something that we would codify in an ordinance, but from an operational standpoint, we want to highlight what we're proposing to continue to address the concerns that we've heard. And one would be to look at adding additional pathway signage to convey the safety and etiquette information, particularly in areas of significant congestion. Those continue to be the Pope Avenue corridor. That comes up time and time again as being one of the most immediate needs in terms of additional signage and addressing those issues of congestion. And along with that, in our upcoming CIP program, we have identified a Pope Avenue streetscape project. And what we would propose is to ensure that as that project moves forward, within the scope of that project would be a clear study of our pedestrian pathways along that corridor, not only to ensure that we take steps to make those align with accepted AASHTO standards, which is kind of the national standards and guidelines in those areas, but also to identify opportunities for additional capacity, looking at the travel lanes through that area and whether or not we could add dedicated bicycle lanes, multi-purpose travel lanes, review uniform striping and use of signage, use of technology if available or beneficial to the system or to the situation, but ultimately looking at what we can do to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety and overall experience through that corridor. And I think if we can at least focus on that as maybe a phase one kind of initiative, doesn't mean that'll be the last area that we look at from that standpoint, but we've heard consistently that that's one of the focal areas that we need to spend a lot of our time and attention on because of the amount of people that are in that area during parts of the year. We've also spoken with the Bike Walk Hilton Head folks. They have an existing bike ambassador program. We would want to continue to partner with them and find opportunities to enhance that program. They've made it clear that they do not want to be involved in any kind of matters dealing with enforcement or the like, and we certainly agree with that. We don't think that that would be appropriate, but to use them, again, in the same way that we used our beach ambassadors this year, it's to help get information out to the public that when we see things or we're observing things, that we say something so that we can ensure safe and appropriate etiquette and behavior on the pathways. And we think that that organization is very positioned to assist us in helping to do that, partly because they are already out there doing that. And then lastly, again, to reemphasize that what we are suggesting here is a tier one approach. It is not going to address every concern that we've heard, but it does allow us to at least move forward, propose to put something in place, and give us the ability to then study how that is impacting or achieving that desired behavior that we are looking for. So I just covered all of that. So here's the summary slide again of what we were requesting in today's committee meeting. And then if appropriate and approved by the committee, we would look to have a draft ordinance prepared along these lines for your review at your February meeting, with the thought that if then approved by the committee, it would go before town council at their meeting on March 15th. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Josh. In the interest of time, let's go with a motion and a second, and then have discussion. If we have to amend the motion, we will. But I'd just like to keep moving. And then secondarily, I've been told that we overlooked limit shuttle access to Islanders Beach Park, so we're going to have to go back. I'd like to confirm that we overlooked it, but apparently we didn't vote on that, so we're going to have to go back to that. So is there a motion to proceed with what Josh was proposing?
Mr. Chair, I would propose to make, instead of one motion, make two motions. I would make a motion that we direct the staff to come forward with drafting an ordinance dealing with the various uses and restrictions for e-bikes as proposed in this presentation. The second motion, if you want me to do it now, the second motion would be to direct the staff to provide further information and to come forward with a plan having to do with the Pope Avenue Street project.
Okay. Is anyone willing to second the first of those two motions?
I'll second it.
Okay. And just for the convenience of time, is there anyone who will second the Pope Avenue motion?
I'll second that one also.
Okay, thank you. So let's have discussion on the first motion. Questions for Josh?
David, I can
Yeah.
jump in with.
Okay.
So two things. One is that this doesn't address the second part of e-bikes concern. There are a lot of people now who own them personally, who drive with them across the bridge, who that first piece of this won't have any impact on. So that's my, I'm not sure that's a question. I think that's a comment, really more than anything. And then secondly, I think there's concern, and I think there's justifiable concern about the use of e-bikes where we actually can control and well, not social control, but as much manage, and is on the beach. And those have real consequences. I think someone earlier in one of the conversations mentioned young children running back and forth from the shore to the beach, holes that are dug. There's a host of safety issues in that, and none of this addresses that. So there you go. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Other comments on the first motion, Alex?
My comments will, you can fold them into both motions, okay?
Okay.
But you know, the bike paths on Hilton Head are such a draw, okay? I mean, it's just part of our it's part of our identity. It's an infrastructure that we cherish here, and it's not going away. I see the demand on our pathways to continue to increase, not just with e-bikes, but just more volume, period. Okay, and while I truly appreciate the Bike Walk organization and them being ambassadors, Mr. Gruber, related them to beach ambassadors, right? I guess I see them a little bit different though, okay? We pour a lot more resources into our beach management than we do our pathway management. And because we know that the demand is going to continue, I'm more inclined for us to recommend that we have somebody in charge. Okay, we all know that enforcement is always going to be the key, and the ambassadors have already made it known that they don't want to cross that line. Okay, so us having some form of management around our pathways, I think, is important moving forward. We can crawl into this, of course, but I think someone monitoring the pathways, gently encouraging the etiquette that we speak of, or we can also describe that as enforcement. And also, I think it really helps us to start to identify more of the pain points Pope Avenue, of course, we know that we have issues there. But there are other issues along the island that may not necessarily pop up unless we have someone reporting it back to us. So I think that's an important piece for us to consider moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alex. Glenn, do you have comments, questions?
In an effort to be brief, I would say that I agree with Tammy partially. Things like speed limits would apply to everybody, whether they were rental bikes or not. Getting the information out is something we're talking about using the rental companies for. So we need to get it out to our citizens as well. But we can certainly get that out to the citizens and make it known that they're not supposed to ride their e-bikes more than 12 miles an hour anywhere on the island. Finally, on the issue of the beach, I'm saying repeatedly, we need enforcement personnel on this island. I think it's going to be part of our next budget to have a serious group of enforcers, and part of their responsibility would be to manage abuses of the bicycles, e-bikes, or whatever on the beach. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate that. I think the speed limit, 12 miles an hour, is reasonable as a starting point. I do have questions about what you said, who's ultimately responsible, who's accountable for abuses. I don't know where that lands at this point. I think that's a conversation that has to continue with the bike shops. The beach, I think, is very important. And we should be tackling that one in probably a couple of different ways. Maybe the speed limit helps, but I really have to wonder from the bike shop standpoint that there isn't a maintenance problem with bikes going on the sand and salt. But I'm just looking for an opportunity to have a conversation that might help mitigate the problems and conflicts on the beach. The detail that I noticed, and I think it's important. You have people going both ways on the bike paths. If you come up behind somebody, do you shout or do you ring a bell? Do you whistle? I mean, do you click something? I think we ought to be looking at some way that we have an expectation that when people are riding bikes or other vehicles on a cart path or bike path, that there's some way to announce you're coming up to somebody else. And then lastly, I think the Pope Avenue initiative is incredibly important because as the bike paths become more and more crowded, I think we're going to have to depend on the asphalt of our roadways to also accommodate the faster bikers and other vehicles like carts, golf carts, and so on. So I'm in favor of both those motions. If there are no other comments, Krista, would you call the first motion on the uses and restrictions that Glenn made?
Yes, sir. Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mrs. Becker,
You're muted.
No, and I have a series of reasons why. I could list them for us. I know everyone is anxious to move on and out of this meeting, which has gone on too long. So I'll just make a comment with regard to that we shouldn't have this many important topics on one agenda. And if we can't give it our full attention and debate and discussion. So for now, the answer is my vote is no for this.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Ames.
Yes.
Motion carries 3-1, sir.
And call the roll on the second motion, please. Pope Avenue.
Yes. Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mrs. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Ames.
Yes.
Motion carries, sir.
Glenn, are you prepared to offer a motion on the shuttle buses at the beach And Krista, I am correct. We overlooked that.
Yes, yes, and I apologize for not bringing it forward sooner.
Okay.
I'm not
It's-
sure
Okay.
Listen, do you have what I said?
Limit shuttle access to Islanders Beach Park.
Correct.
I wish I could get somebody to read back my motion to me.
Well, actually, we didn't have a motion on that. The item was missed altogether, sir.
I overlooked it. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I would move that we limit access of tour buses, shuttles to vehicles that are carrying residents of the island, particularly those that are coming from civic groups, church groups, or from retirement homes or assisted living facilities.
Is there a second on that?
Oh, I'll second that.
Okay. Jeff, are you still on? Is that motion adequate from your standpoint?
Yes, sir, it is. And in your package, there was an Exhibit D, a proposed resolution that we had recommended put forth to council.
I
Was
don't
that
see
on
that.
page 150 or 379?
Yeah, exactly. Restrict commercial vehicles, including shuttle buses, from entering the park with exceptions granted for vehicles registered to Hilton Head Island assisted living facilities, nonprofits, religious institutions, and other similar civic community groups that exclusively transport island residents.
I would so accept that amendment to my motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, let's call the roll.
Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mrs. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Ames,
Yes,
motion carries, sir.
and I believe that's the conclusion of our agenda. I am sorry that as chairman, I was unable to move things faster. I acknowledge and recognize what Council Member Becker said about the extensive agenda. And that's something that I'll try to manage better in the future.
May I just say something? First of all, it wasn't a personal comment against you, David. It was just.
No,
a general-
I didn't take it as a personal comment, but I do have that responsibility.
Okay. And then secondly, just as a thought for, well, Jeff, and we're all here, I know with regard to Islanders, I know we talked about, and Glenn's going to pull his hair out, sorry. But we talked about the parking meters. One of the questions that I have that I wanted to add to my list, the things that I think we need to think through a little bit more, is there are 25 parking spots there. If they remain, what is the mechanism that would monitor those 25 spots in terms of their availability, so that there's not a host of beach pass marked cars coming through looking for them if they're not available, and then just saying, oh, well, what the heck, I'm going to park anywhere and take my chances on a ticket. So just a point in terms of how that can be better managed in this upcoming season, so that you get my point. I don't have to continue to describe it. Okay, so we'll talk about that again, but I just wanted to bring that up as something that I think would help.
Thank you. All right. With that, I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.